Okay, so the first thing we'll be talking about is password attacks. So the way computers store your passwords is in obviously a file. It's in a text file, but this text file, you don't want it to be plain text, as plain text is unencrypted. So hackers or anybody can just go onto your computer and find the file and open it and look at all your passwords as they are unencrypted and just plain and easy to read. For example, a plain text encrypted password could be this password, and Windows will have a hash, will hash this password and store it as this, and this would be the encrypted one, and this is not your actual password, so the hackers won't easily be able to easily find your password and use it. So first of all, does anyone know of the some good passwords? Because having strong passwords is very important in cybersecurity, the cybersecurity world actually. So if you didn't know that. So can anyone give examples of strong passwords? P actually said, can't hackers unencrypt passwords? Yes, they can, but that will take a lot harder and you to do, and you'll probably also see some suspicious things going on in your computer before. So if anyone doesn't know of any strong passwords, then we can just move on because that's probably everyone knows about strong passwords anyways. So the password file is every operating system stores passwords differently, and in Linux it's in etc/etc/shadow file, which will show all your passwords encrypted. And if that's where you want to go find your passwords, you're going to have to be able to do something with them, and you're not actually able to read them well. So a first password attack is brute force, and many of you probably heard of this brute force attack, as it's quite self-explanatory. Brute force is just trying all the possible combinations and permutation until the right guess works. So basically they're trying to guess your password without any hints, without any inside information about what your password might be. So they're just maybe typing in random numbers, maybe systematically doing it, but it might take really long if your password is secure and not very common. This type of attack is very slow, obviously, because you have to try many different combinations if the password is safe and strong. Many operating systems will lock you out after a certain amount of failed attempts, because you are probably a hacker if you don't get the password after 10 tries, or you just forgot it and you need to contact their support or something. And doing this offline will not lock you out. Another type of password attack is dictionary attacks. It's basically another type of brute force attack where it uses common words that appear in passwords to try and guess your password. Uh, dictionary attack is probably the first the first attempt is probably a dictionary attack because it tries most of the most common words in the dictionary, and most passwords have these common words, and you might be able to guess it in this first attempt. Another type of password attack is called spraying attacks. Basically means to attempt random passwords, and this is very ineffective, and it's just based on luck. It's not actually anything based on any hints or even computations about what your password might be. Just randomly typing in some letters and numbers, and sometimes if they have inside information on what the password might be, then they will try to guess things related to that first. What about the number of digits in the password? Uh, not all operating systems show how many digits are in the password. Like, for example, Windows, I don't think it shows how many digits are in each password as it just a bar, and it could be infinitely long. So there is something called a rainbow table, which is a pre-calculated series of hashes using known hashing algorithms. So this is basically where the hackers go to find common calculated series of hashes. So it's easier for them to find your password basically. This is commonly used for cracking passwords, as I just mentioned, as they use the rainbow tables to find the matching hashes and look up the input text that gave the result, and there will be a password. There is one rainbow table built for each application. So if you have a game and then maybe a browser or something, they have two different rainbow tables. To defend against these passwords, you obviously want strong passwords. And these strong passwords usually consist of all the characters, letters, numbers, uh, dashes, all those other characters. And you want to limit the number of incorrect attempts, like you in Linux, you can go into the password files and change uh the login attempts to 5 or 7. So if they try too many times, then they will be logged out and maybe they have to wait 30 minutes. If you have common passwords around your accounts, then that will be much easier for the hackers to guess in like one try, as most people just reuse their old passwords because out of efficiency, so they don't have to remember and create a new password. You have to protect your password and your password hashes, and always change your passwords frequently. So if there is a data leak on some other application or website, then all your passwords that are the same as that application's password will be changed if you change it frequently. So this is a video. I think we should watch it.
Hey mom, I spent 8 years on this degree, but I hate it and I really want to change jobs. I'm sorry, I know this.
Our passwords are often the only credential that's preventing somebody from gaining access to one of our services. Occasionally, you'll run into a service that stores these passwords in the clear or in an unencrypted form where anybody can read the password on that particular service if they know where to look. This is fortunately very rare, but occasionally you will run into an application that stores their passwords in this insecure method. The best practice for passwords is to never store the passwords as plain text. If anyone does happen to come across that file or that database containing the passwords, they would effectively have everyone's credentials. Unfortunately, if this is an application that the developers won't change, then you'll either have to continue using the application with those security concerns or remove that application from your network entirely. So how should you store a password? One very common way is to store it as a hash. A hash is a cryptographic method that takes an input of information, like a password, and creates a fixed length string of text. We refer to this text as a message digest or a fingerprint. We call it a fingerprint because each type of input into the hashing function has a completely separate and different output than any other input. Like a fingerprint, your password creates a very unique hash, and no other type of input should make exactly that same hash. The goal is to create a hashing function that would be very difficult to have exactly the same fingerprint or hash between two different inputs. We refer to this duplication as a collision, and if we find that a hashing function has a number of these collisions, then we may decide to use a different type of hashing function. Another important characteristic of a hash is once you create the hash, there's no way to undo that process to get back to the original message. This is something that's perfect for passwords because we could hash the password, but there would be no way to undo the hash to somehow derive what the original password happened to be. Here's an example of some hashing functions. The hash we're using here is specifically the SHA-256 hash function, and you can see I have a number of passwords like 123456, 123456, QWERTY, and password. And you can see that we have the same length of hash for every single one of those inputs. But you can also see that the differences between these hashes are very dramatic between all four of these passwords. Even with a password like 123456 and one of 123457, where only one letter is different, the different hashes are very, very different between them. You'll find that different operating systems and different applications use different hashing functions and store the hashes in different ways. This is the password file from a Linux device, and you can see it's stored with the username, the number of the account, and then the password hash included on the same line. Although you can't undo the hashing process to determine what the original password was, you could perform a brute force attack of the hash where you're trying every possible password combination to see if it matches the hash that you've already stored. This is called a brute force attack, and depending on the type of hash you're using, it could take a very long amount of time to go through every possible password combination until you happen to find an identical hash. Let's perform a brute force attack, and let's use as a hash this value that we have here on the screen. To perform the brute force, we need to start stepping through every possible combination of letters, numbers, and special characters until we can match that hash. So let's start with the password of AAAAA. And if we look at the hash of that value, we can see it does not match the hash that we were looking for. So let's go to the next one on our list, which would be AAAAB. And if we examine that hash, that doesn't match. The next is AAAAC. That one also does not match. And you can see why this might take a very long period of time before we ever find a match. If we keep going through this brute force over and over and over again, eventually we'll get to the word password, which does match the hash that we have here. So we were able to determine that in this case, the password that was used to create this hash is the word password. Performing a brute force attack online can not only be time consuming, but often is not very feasible. You would use a username with a particular password. When that didn't work, we would try another password. When that didn't work, we would try another password. But very quickly, we're going to run into a lockout on this account because after a certain number of failed login attempts, the system will automatically lock that account. The hackers are much smarter than this. They will take the hash file offline and they'll begin performing the brute force attack themselves with their own application. They'll perform the same calculation of the hash values. They'll compare it to the hash that they've stored on their system, and they'll keep going through all of them over and over again until they find a match. This is obviously going to use a lot of CPU resources as we go through every possible password combination for every single account that we might have hashes for. Fortunately for the attacker, human beings like to use real words as part of their password. So instead of going through every single iteration of letters, numbers, and special characters, the attacker can instead use a set of words that they can find in the dictionary. We obviously refer to this as a dictionary attack, and we can assume that it's going to take much shorter amount of time to go through a dictionary attack because there's a smaller number of words in a dictionary than there is for any combination of letters, numbers, and special characters. Obviously, the attacker is hoping that the users have selected real words as part of their password, and if any have, they'll be able to identify it with a dictionary attack. The attackers might also use a set of specialized word lists that they can download from the internet. For example, if they retrieved a set of hashes from a medical facility, they might want a dictionary that has more medical terms inside of it. And if you think you can fool the hackers by changing an O to a 0 or an L to a 7, they have already thought of this. So during the dictionary attack, they will also change out letters that are commonly substituted when people are creating a password. Even though the number of possible words you would go through is smaller, you're still using a lot of CPU cycles. So you would probably have a distributed cracking method or use a graphical processing unit or your graphics card to be able to provide additional CPU for this cracking process. The limitation from a dictionary attack, of course, is that anything that is not in the dictionary won't be discovered by this attack. But if someone is using standard words like ninja, dragon, football, let me in, or password, a dictionary attack is perfect for finding these passwords.
Well, okay, so that is basically a summary of what I just talked about. So now we have a quiz of these questions. You can answer them one by one out loud, or you could, or in chat, and you could also answer them just at once. I'll give you like 2-3 minutes with this. You don't have to go in depth. You can just say, like, for what is a dictionary tag? They use dictionary for common words or something. Alan said brute force attack is trying out every combination. Yes, that is true. That is correct. Justin said password attacks, hackers try to get your password in some way. Yes, that is correct. Peggy said a strong password is that, yeah, that is a very strong password, as I cannot pronounce it. Spraying attacks, hacker tries random passwords and hopes to get lucky. It's not effective. Yes, that is basically the definition. Rainbow table, pre-calculated hashes, hackers matches them with known hash. That is correct. Dictionary attack, hacker tries common words in the dictionary. Yep. Okay, I think we can move on now. The next section is about physical attacks. So, what do you guys think would be a physical attack and like physical attack to your computer? What do you think a physical way to get malware onto your system then? USB, yes, that is correct. We'll be explaining that shortly. So first way is through USB cables, as many of you just said. And these USB cables may look innocent. They may look like cables for tablets and smartphones. And these USB cables are not supposed to have privileges to your to your system and to your files, but they could appear as a HID system, which the computer allows. And once the computer allows it, it installs and runs malicious scripts on the system that the hacker put into the hacker downloaded into the USB. How to defend against these? Yeah, I think it's quite obvious. You just buy and use USBs from trusted people and don't take suspicious USBs from other people. Uh, Also there are malicious flash drives, but when you plug these flash drives in, there will be malware downloaded onto your system. So this is basically like the USB cables, but it just flash drives. And you defend them the same way you would defend against USB cables. Another physical attack is for your for your credit card, because your credit card is very important as it has access to all your money in your bank account. So credit card cloning is when your credit card is cloned to be like another card. So these hackers use them to buy things under your name because maybe the machines think it's in a real legit card that's actually from a bank, but it's actually just a fake one that the hackers use to steal money. These credit cards, these fake credit cards are either made by a malicious person or they are bought from the dark web by a malicious person. There are skimmers that allow devices to get cards data. Like, you know how when you go to like the cashier at a grocery store and they have the things where you plug in the cards to type in your PIN and things to buy your items, but in some of those machines there may be skimmers which read your card's data and downloads it to which downloads and sends it to a malicious person, which will then use that to generate a fake credit card and use that fake credit card under your name. Uh, to defend against these attacks, you want to check your machines that you're buying from or that you're putting your card into for skimmers, and always keep your credit card safe. So don't let them leak online and don't drop them physically in the world. This was a short section. So does anyone need a summary? If they want the summary, you can just say to watch the video. Wait. Uh, He said, "What if someone hacked the network of the entire grocery store chain and stole all the credit card numbers?" That's just I guess that's just a hack on the network. So we can watch the video.
This is a real B&H customer story. Jack and Barbara, professional wildlife photographers and B&H.
Attacks aren't always done across the network. There are many attacks that are physical attacks. One type of physical attack might be with a malicious USB cable. This looks like a perfectly normal USB cable. We would use it to plug into our computer and charge our systems, except it has some additional electronics inside. It could, in fact, tell your operating system that it is a HID, or a human interface device. This is the categorization for keyboards and a mouse. So when you plug in this malicious USB cable, it's able to start typing anything that it would like into your system. So you might plug in the cable, it would start up a command prompt, it would type in some commands to download some malware from a third-party site, and now your system is infected. This is why you shouldn't simply plug in any USB cable that you happen to find. You need to have some trusted knowledge of where this cable came from and trust that it came from a reliable source. Similar to the malicious USB cable is the malicious flash drive. This may be a perfectly normal working flash drive, but it may have some additional electronics inside that could cause problems on your system. You might be walking through the parking lot, there's a flash drive on the ground, and most people would want to know what's on this flash drive and could they use this flash drive themselves. But plugging in this device is probably going to be a bad idea. In older operating systems, we automated the processes that occurred when you plugged in a flash drive and would have programs run automatically from that particular storage device. But obviously, this is a significant security concern, and in most modern operating systems, this automated functionality has been removed. But just as with our USB cable, we could still run things from a USB flash drive by adding additional electronics inside that have this device recognized as a HID, or human interface device. So it appears to be a keyboard or a mouse, and when you plug in the flash drive, you'll notice the command prompt will open, a lot of things start typing in, and suddenly your system is now infected with malware. Even without that human interface device functionality, there are ways for attackers to simply put files on the flash drive that might infect your system. For example, you can put malicious software inside of PDF files or have malicious macros run inside of spreadsheets. If your USB interface is configured with a boot device, you might forget that you have this USB drive installed, and when you restart the system, the USB drive infects your system during the boot process. Add some additional electronics, and this flash drive can turn into a wireless interface that can then act as a host for other devices to connect into your system, and you now become a jumping off point for an attacker who may want to gain access to your internal network. These are just some of the reasons why you want to be very careful about what USB devices you connect to your computer. Stealing credit card information has become a big business, and there's so many different ways that the bad guys are trying to gain access to our credit card numbers. One way they're able to do this is with skimming. This is stealing our credit card information as we use the card for some other purpose. It's copying information either from the magnetic stripe that's on that credit card, or it may be gathering information from the computer system that you're plugging it into. This would have your credit card number, expiration dates, the cardholder's name, and anything else that's on that magnetic stripe. The attackers are usually adding additional hardware to the card reader on the device that you're using. And if you're at an ATM, they may also have a camera that's monitoring what buttons you press when you put your PIN into the system. The attackers will obviously skim your credit card numbers and then use that information to perform other financial transactions. This is why you should always check very carefully when using a card reader. Maybe pull on the card reader itself and make sure it doesn't pop out of the system, and make sure that everything associated with that card reader looks like it is built into the original unit. Here's an example of a card reader where the attacker had to create a little bit of a wider connection to be able to fit their card reader in, and this piece of plastic on the inside is the one put there by the attacker. You can see they didn't do a very good job. They damaged the system itself, and if you walked up to this system and examined it prior to you putting your card in, you would notice that something about this did not look quite right. Some banks have tried to put some oddly molded plastic around the outside of their ATMs as a way to try to prevent somebody from adding their own skimmer into the system. They might also put some type of colored or lighted piece of plastic on the outside so you can see this is original to the ATM and not added by a third party. Sometimes attackers are going to use this credit card information that they've skimmed to perform online transactions. But sometimes the attacker needs another physical card to use. And in that case, they're going to clone the details of your card. They'll create an exact duplicate of your credit card with all the same numbers and information, and they'll put even the same CVC or card validation code on the back of the card as well. The attackers are cloning the magnetic stripe that's on the back of the card, so obviously they would only be able to use this card in transactions that took that magnetic stripe. The chips that are on the inside of our cards are not able to be duplicated and can't be cloned by the attackers. One very common use of magnetic stripes on cards is gift cards. The attackers will clone a gift card, they'll wait for that card to be activated, and then they'll use the gift card before the legitimate user is able to do so.
So that is a summary of physical attacks. And now is the quiz, a short quiz. Just name 3 most common types of physical attacks, which I just talked about. USB, USB flash drive, and skimmer, credit card. Yeah, all of those are correct answers. So we'll be moving on now. This might be a new topic to a lot of you. It's, or maybe just be just a different name. So we will be talking about adversarial AI, which is basically when artificial intelligence is trained to mess with someone's data. So first of all, artificial intelligence is when computer and systems mimic human intelligence. So like robots, you probably will think of when you think of artificial intelligence. And the way these robots are trained is through machine learning, which then hackers can use use machine learning to train an AI to do certain things that probably shouldn't be done. And so adversarial AI basically means to use AI for a malicious intent. So the AI data program can be tainted to mess with someone else's data. So they're trained to go onto someone's system and maybe delete their files or edit their files or steal their files. Or they could alter network traffic monitoring rules to allow bad things in. To be secure against this, you want all your machine learning to be secured. So the malicious hackers cannot train your these AI to mess with your data. That, I don't think we really need to watch a video about this. I think it's just AI being trained to do bad things. So a quiz is what is artificial intelligence? I'm not too worried about this one. I think we should focus on what is the difference between adversarial AI and regular artificial intelligence, and why why is there a difference, I guess. Does anyone have an idea? You can just type it in the chat. Yes, AI is artificial intelligence. Adversarial AI is used against the computer it is on. That is true. Does anyone have an idea for the difference between regular AI and adversarial AI? So basically, adversarial AI is AI that is trained through machine learning to be just to do bad things to your data, like your files and stuff. So we will be going on to supply chain attacks. Does anyone have any idea what a supply chain attack might mean? Maybe from the name? Attacking computers that control supply chains? Uh, no. So a supply chain attack is basically when when a third party uses malicious software, I guess, or things on other companies' products. Like an example is an HVAC company fixing air conditioners, a company supplying network cables that maybe connect to your router, a cleaning company, a vendor supplying point of sale devices. Uh, if these companies are compromised, then like all of their products on their supply chain could be infected with something bad, or might have some faulty things that are purposely placed by the malicious actors. So there have been real world examples. A pretty recent one is the solar wind attack. You guys might have heard about that one, about the solar wind attack. And another one is the not Petya Tia virus that affected big companies. So which one do you want to take a look at? I guess we can take a look at the solar wind attack. Uh, it says that it first explains that Solar Winds is a information technology firm, and then down here, it says that why it matters and how it affected Solar Winds, and that multiple networks have been penetrated. It's expensive and very difficult to secure systems. Solar Winds was a company that allowed that I guess worked in security, and since it had been compromised through all their products, like the products that they sell out to customers had been compromised through a cybersecurity attack. Many, I guess many customers could be infected, and all the other products that they were about to send out to the customers would be infected, and that it wasn't safe to use. So to defend against these supply chain attacks, you want to hire trustworthy third parties. So third parties that don't mess with your products, I mean with your items, and you want to you want to go with a safe option, not the cheap option. Like not you don't want to always go for the cheap option because the cheap option might actually be I mean it might actually have a malicious intent, and since cheap is always appealing to humans, many customers will go after the cheap items and products and they'll buy them, but the cheap products might actually be faulty and have malicious things on them. Uh, I think we could watch this video.
This is a real B&H customer story. Jack and Barbara, professional wildlife photographers and
The supply chain is the chain of manufacturing that gets a product from the very beginning to the very end of its process. This includes the raw materials, suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, customers, and consumers. With all of these different points along the chain, there's a lot of opportunity for someone to be able to attack any one of these and affect anybody else who might be downstream in that chain. One of the reasons this works so well is that we tend to trust what we receive from our suppliers, not realizing, of course, that somewhere up the chain there was an attack that now has shown itself in the equipment, the software, or the technology that we're now putting onto our network. And with so many other steps before that technology arrives on our doorstep, there are plenty of places for an attacker to be able to infect that supply chain. A notable supply chain breach occurred in November of 2013 with the Target Corporation, where 40 million credit card numbers were stolen. This attack did not start at Target. It instead started in Pennsylvania for an HVAC company. That's a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company. This is an organization that had people that took care of and maintained the HVAC systems for many of the Target locations. To be able to interact with Target, there was a VPN connection that these technicians would use to be able to send and receive information about these HVAC systems. There was an email with malware that was delivered to this firm in Pennsylvania, and that malware was able to obtain the VPN credentials so that the attackers were able to access the VPN themselves. This was the breach of the supply chain. The attackers were able to take advantage of the HVAC suppliers and gain access to the inside of the Target network. Unfortunately, the Target network did not have any additional security on the inside to prevent vendors from gaining access to other parts of the network. So once the attackers got onto the Target network, they then had access to every single register at all 1,800 Target stores. This is a good example of how a supply chain attack can occur because the attack vector isn't one you were expecting. The folks that are on the roof taking care of the air conditioning and heating are not where you would expect a breach to come that would then attack and steal over 40 million credit cards. Supply chain cybersecurity has become a significant concern for organizations. You have to know and trust that your server, your router, your switch, your firewall, or any of the software you're installing is something that you can trust to put on your network. Many organizations are narrowing down the number of vendors they work with so that they can do more testing and more auditing and make sure that what they're receiving from those suppliers is trusted. Organizations are also requiring that those suppliers have very strict controls over everything that they're doing and that audits can occur within the supplier's network so that everybody can trust exactly what's being delivered to the end user. If you have relationships with your suppliers, this is a good chance to team up with them and make sure that everyone is able to get a safer product all the way through the supply chain.
That was a pretty short summary of supply chain attacks, and now is the quiz. You could answer in the chat as always. does anyone have any idea what a supply chain attack is or how to defend against these supply chain attacks? Justin said, attacks that target companies important to the public. That, yes, that is true. They serve the public through their products, I guess, and then the people with the malicious intent uh will put things onto those products and or attack the company's network and do things to their products. So to defend against these supply chain attacks, you just buy from trusted companies, but these trusted companies might be compromised. So you always want to watch out what you always want to maybe check what you're getting from these companies, especially like antivirus companies or different software companies. Uh, this will this section will be talking about cloud-based versus on-premises attacks. So cloud-based versus on-premises, what's the difference? Well, cloud-based is just attacks that occur on the cloud, like Google Cloud, Microsoft, Azure, AWS. Uh, it trusts someone else's security, meaning that it doesn't have very good security of its own to defend against these attacks. And on-premises attacks, they attack the site directly, and the companies own these systems, so they probably have security. They probably have security installed, but with the cloud-based attacks, they're trusting Google, Microsoft, or Amazon to have good security to protect them. So there are definitely pros and cons to cloud-based security and on-premises security against these different attacks. Cloud-based is much harder to break into because they are well secured, but these security systems have to defend against a lot more attacks than on-premises security systems. On-premises security systems, they don't have to defend against many attacks, but they are much easier to break into. Or not much easier, just usually easier to. I don't really think we need this video. And so there is a quiz. What is cloud-based? What is on-premises attacks? And what is the difference between the two? You can just give a short summary, like maybe a sentence or two for each question. So do I have to do you guys want me to go back and explain again? So a cloud-based attack is an attack that, yeah, what Paige said, attack occurs on the cloud and on premises occurs at the site. And the difference between these two is that one has to defend against a lot more attacks, and so it's much more secure. And the other one doesn't have to defend against that many attacks, so it's less secure. Now the final section will be cryptography attacks or cryptographic attacks. So if so over the network or yeah, over the network, strong encryptions, they help keep your messages, what your computer sends, and your messages to have safe communication, so they're not easily disrupted and maybe uh I guess you could say stolen, because the your information of what you're sending and what your computer is sending is stolen. So modern encryption methods are based on algorithms that are relatively easy to compute but difficult and time consuming to decrypt without the key. So what you need to have a usually you need to have a key to able to uncrypt these messages, but are ways to there are ways to break in, and that's where the cryptographic attacks come in. And attempts to break encryption by a third party must be anticipated. So there are many attacks, I guess, against these encryption methods and encryptions. So you must anticipate for them. So the first uh way of attacking is collisions. And since hashes are basically encryption probably relies on hashes, so to ensure the data integrity, and hashes are supposed to be unique, so it's less easier to be guessed. But when hashes are the same, that's called a collision. And the well, here it says the MD5 hashing algorithm is a popular method. So with MD5, hackers can generate collisions. Well, not hackers. People can generate collisions and uh I guess use that. This is a collision example. So collisions are bad for secure, trustworthy encryption, and to def to be secure against these attacks, I guess you have to have big hashes as shown here, and you can see that in both of these pictures they have the same MD5 hash, which is a collision. So now we go on to another attack. Well, not another attack yet, but this leads to an attack. So there is something called a birthday problem. And with a group of 30 people, what are the chances that any two individuals share a birthday? So once you work it out, it goes around to 70%. And this is known as the birthday paradox. You can probably search it up. There's probably like a TED edit on it or something. But when you add more people to the room, then to the group, then there are the chances of having the same birthday goes up. This will lead to the birthday attack, which they look for, instead of looking for the same birthdays, they look for matching hash values or the same hash values. They use brute force, like brute forcing passwords to find a collision through brute force. And so hackers generate multiple versions of plain text to hash, then check for matching hashes, which is basically like kind of like similar to guessing passwords, but like the larger the hash, the harder it is, and that is the same with password as well. And there is also the downgrade attack, which is the last attack we will be talking about. This is downgrading like they downgrade encryption systems or encryption algorithms, so that have more security holes in them. Some older code may have lots more bugs because it's not updated, and hackers can force a system to downgrade its security and its encryption algorithms, and it weakens the entire security of the entire system. We can watch this video.
Oregon State residents, if you have a utility meter like this on the side of your house,
Let's say that you've encrypted some data and you've put it into an email and you're sending me this encrypted message. How do we know if that data that you're sending to me was really secure all the way between you and me, and that nobody in the middle was able to gain access to that information? This is the challenge we have when dealing with cryptographic attacks. The attacker often doesn't have the key to be able to decrypt what's there, so instead they use other techniques to try to gain access to the data. Very often, even though they don't have the combination of the safe, they may be able to break in through other parts of the safe to gain access to what's inside. Attackers spend a lot of time trying to find inconsistencies, problems, and cryptographic vulnerabilities with these methods that we use to transfer data from point A to point B. And very often it's not the cryptography that's the problem, it's the way that we've implemented the cryptography that allows the attackers to gain access to the data. One type of attack is the birthday attack. And the birthday attack is based around this particular problem. You have a classroom of 23 students. What is the chance that 2 students in the classroom share a birthday? The answer is 50%, which is a pretty high number considering there's only 23 students. If we had 30 students, this would increase to about 70% of a chance. That's because we're not comparing 2 individual students to see if they share a birthday. We're comparing every student to every other student to see if there's a shared birthday. In the digital world, we call this a hash collision. A hash collision is when you have 2 very different types of plain text, but both of those plain texts create exactly the same hash. This is something that should never happen. And if we're able to find a hash collision, we may be able to take advantage of this inconsistency in the hash algorithm. With a hash collision, the attacker spends their time finding that other type of plain text that matches that hash. One way to prevent this is to increase the size of the hash, which decreases the potential to have a collision. Collisions are bad because the hashes are always supposed to be a unique value. If you put in one type of plain text, it should be a unique hash. If you put in a different plain text, it should never be exactly the same hash. One well-known collision hash occurred with MD5. This was the Message Digest Algorithm version 5, which was first published in April of 1992, and we identified collisions with this hashing algorithm in 1996. Researchers were able to expand on this hash collision, and in December of 2008, they created a certificate authority certificate that appeared legitimate if you looked at the MD5 hash. So they were effectively able to create a fake certificate authority that looked like a completely legitimate CA. This is obviously going to create some significant concerns if you're relying on these CA signatures for the trust of your website certificates. Here's an example of a collision that occurs with MD5. These are 2 separate inputs, and you can see they're mostly similar, but there are some differences between the 2 that are highlighted in red. If you perform an MD5 hash against both of these, you should receive a very different hash, but in reality, you receive exactly the same hash, and that is a hash collision. Another type of attack is a downgrade attack. Normally, when you want to communicate securely to another device, there's a conversation that initially takes place where both sides determine what the best possible encryption algorithm might be. If you're able to somehow sit in the middle and influence that conversation, you could have the two sides downgrade to a type of encryption that might be very easy to break. A popular example of downgrade attack occurred in 2014. These were researchers that found a vulnerability in the transport layer security. This was the security that was the successor to SSL, or secure sockets layer, or the encryption mechanism that we use to communicate to web servers. They were able to sit in the middle of a conversation between two devices that would be an on-path attack, and they forced the two sides to communicate at a much downgraded level of encryption. They fell back to SSL version 3.0. Well, with SSL 3.0, there are some significant cryptographic vulnerabilities, which is why we don't use SSL 3.0 any longer. And because of that, the rest of the conversation was one that was susceptible to being decrypted by the third party. After this particular vulnerability was released, we all configured our web servers not to allow SSL 3.0. We changed our browser configuration, and these days it's very difficult to find a browser that even supports SSL 3.0, all because of this Poodle downgrade attack.
So now we have the last quiz of this session, besides from maybe the Kahoot at the end. So you can answer any of these questions. Justin said cracking encryptions to see the encrypted messages. Yeah. Milan said collisions are when two different plaintexts have the same hashing. Yep. Justin said downgrade is attacking the older encryption methods. Downgrade is forcing the encryption algorithms, or like the encryption algorithms to downgrade to a older version, so it's less secure and it has lots more holes in it. So we can play a